Welcome back to episode 3 of our podcast, The History of Zero Trust. I am James Tucker, CISO for EMEA here at Zscaler, and I'm joined, as always, by Martyn.
It's great to be back, James. So Marytn Ditchburn, CTO in residence for Zscaler, and I think we're back talking about AI and future tech in this one. So it'll be a great session to unpack with you.
Yeah, let's try to kind of shed our corporate mentality here and try to think a little bit about what the future could hold, and not limit ourselves just to kind of AI, because honestly, half of the people listening have probably already clicked off when they heard us talking about AI. But let's really think about what the future of security is going to be, given the fact that, I don't know, maybe it's just me getting older, but I feel like technology is going faster and faster and faster, right? I can use AI from a 5G device in my pocket at any time, which is not something that I would have believed to be true even 5 years ago.
And I think that's a really good point to pick up on. Really when we're talking about, AI, we are talking about, learning at scale and learning at speed. And those speeds are only really possible through advances in communication tech. And I think we're seeing an emergence of IoT in particular. One statistic that stuck in my mind recently was that, there are 8 billion people on the planet, but there are already, over 17 billion IoT devices.
That's me and having 10 iPads for my children.
Right. And
Certainly.
I have a few as well. And I think this is the dynamics of all of those things coming together. So we are seeing a fusion of communication, accessible data, but also how that data is, ingested and interpreted and then given back to us.
Do you think that the current sort of AI fascination would be possible without the advent of cloud computing?
I don't. I think only cloud can really give us this scale of compute that's kind of required. And I certainly think that the fail fast mentality has given developers a platform on which they can build the AI sort of paradigm. I think it is synonymous with the idea of generative, large language models, but only at the scale that is achievable through large compute.
I was thinking back to kind of my early days, which were a few years ago, we'll put it that way, where you used to start up a server and you gave it a name, right? I always went with Simpsons characters, Homer 1, Homer 2, Homer 3, Homer 10. And you cared about that device, and now everything's sort of a Docker image in the cloud, and you just sort of kind of wipe and replace, and we don't name that. We don't name our servers anymore, really.
Right. I think mine were Star Wars characters, so very similar to you. But you're right. I think in the cloud world, they call that concept cattle and pets. Right. The idea that you will cull your cattle and you look after your pets, and that's really the world that immutable compute and cloud kind of give us today.
And when I think about how things have changed, we did start out talking about, way back in episode 1, we started talking about the origin of the internet. And I'm of an age where I remember not being able to use Wikipedia as a source in school because it was too new and anybody could edit it. And now my daughter told me just this week that she's allowed to use ChatGPT for her homework assignments, but she has to provide the prompts specifically. And that got me thinking about how fast we're adopting these new technologies. And where do you think, in the context of zero trust and really the spirit of the podcast and what we've been talking about, how do you think that speed, of AI and development and just tech in general is going to impact the way that we secure our environments?
Yeah, I think that's the paradigm, isn't it? Which is AI is giving creative people the ability to generate new content and try new things, really sort of push the envelope in things that were possible before. But counter to that, the idea that AI can be used for, malicious kind of purposes is something that security professionals everywhere are starting to think about.
I think about it every day.
Right. And I think, we've all sort of seen it in our daily lives. The quality of phishing email has kind of gone up. There used to be, a great number of campaigns that focused on spelling mistakes and sort of changes of URLs, et cetera. And that's kind of largely gone away. And the attacks are certainly becoming more sophisticated. I think what we're really talking about when it comes to security's thinking around AI protection itself is that whilst AI might be revolutionary, I think the tools at our disposal are more evolutionary. So Zero Trust really comes into the heart of that because its approaches around DLP and the way it sort of, ingests that sort of data and understands that data gives us a platform on which we can protect that data from leaving our organization.
Categorize it and such.
Right. And I think data matters when it comes to things like AI. If you were to point AI at my public persona, it'll probably tell you that I'm always on holiday. There's always lots of birthdays kind of going on. But the reality is if you were to point that same ingestion into my private data, it will tell you far more richer things about me that will be of use. So who I collaborate with most, what are my ideas on a particular topic? And those are the sort of, difficulties around, the AI ingestion.
So I think it's interesting because you had that concept of just, this inside the network of Marytn for you. And, we've known each other for years now, and I still don't know the answers to a lot of the questions you brought up. But what I think also tying back to the generative capabilities of AI, where now we have, I think from a security side, from a risk perspective side, AI will, and has to some degree, but going forward will even more so, lower the barrier to entry to be a bad guy, right? You don't have to understand vulnerabilities. You don't have to spend hours combing through LinkedIn posts. You just say, hey, AI, go out and search for Acme, find out everything, and then come back, get some answers as to potential targets, or even fully automate that. Hey, once you find a target, send an email based on their public persona, right? And so then Janice gets an email that says, hey, I know you love kayaks and cats, and here's the cat kayak canoe weekend or whatever it is to get her to click.
Right. And this is, what we're really talking about is accessibility and speed. I think there's always been, ever since the emergence of the internet, there's always been people looking to exploit it. And I think in recent years, it's been more of an evolution of, accessible hacking tools, right? Script kiddies, commoditized sort of hacking or, sort of groups. But now AI, to your point, is making that highly accessible to just the layman. So now it is possible through natural language to sort of say, what organizations have a particular vendor or firewall? What are the vulnerabilities attached to that firewall? Now write me a program that's going to exploit that vulnerability. And that's something that is on a level that we have never seen before.
Yeah, and that barrier to entry, there's already a lot of organized hacking and certainly disorganized hacking. You mentioned script kiddies and that kind of stuff, but are they really a thing anymore? I think they're few and far between in terms of presenting a real threat. But with these new generation of tools, and given the fact that our network is not a network anymore, it's any device on any network anywhere, kind of everything, everywhere, all at once kind of mentality. The attack or the techniques that we used to use whenever there's a new technology, those techniques get rehashed, leveraging that new whatever it is. I'll tell a real quick story and then I'll give you the example, which is when I was very young and had dial-up service, I got infected with something that would randomly in the middle of the night dial toll numbers. And then my parents got an outrageous phone bill, which was going direct to whoever generated that malware. Fast forward 15, 20 years, and Android had the exact same technique, right? An app that would just make toll calls when you weren't paying attention. Same kind of playbook, just using new technology. So I think AI is going to first start by leveraging a lot of those old playbooks, like you said, looking for VPN exploits. But realistically, I believe that in the next year, we're going to see an attack that is successful, where somebody has leveraged AI type techniques to just say, go break into there. and kind of soup to nuts, it was all run automatically. Do you think I'm crazy for saying that?
No, I don't think you're crazy.
Do you think I'm crazy in general?
Yes, I do.
Okay, good.
But I think the same powers that gave AI the power, the capabilities it had, is really the things that we could use to ultimately defeat it, right? So AI to fight AI, right? So using that same sort of speed to learn those sort of techniques and to combat it. I think there was a common trail of thought recently that AI was really going to take three forms, and that was really AI for offense, AI for defense, and then the protection of AI itself. And I think as practitioners, we're starting to get very good at protecting AI itself, right? So the way we govern how organizations are using AI, the ethics around sort of the data that they store, and we're seeing an emergence of AI for offense. We're certainly seeing that on a daily basis.
Yes,
where
absolutely.
we haven't got to yet, in my opinion, is really getting good at that AI for defense. And that's still an emerging, sort of area for everybody, I think.
There are some elements where I see, faster convictions in a sandbox, for example, or identifying information types so we know what level. But that's where we hit that weird distinction between what's machine learning and what's AI and all of those. But I agree with you that defense side is very much a developing space. I do think, however, that if you're in a zero trust environment, that minimizes the impact of that AI's successful attack. But even beyond that, I think, tools like deception or, kind of a honeypot type environment are going to be more common in most large organizations. Because when somebody sort of escapes the matrix of zero trust and starts poking around, you want to be able to detect that and capture those techniques to feed back into whatever your defense is. Do you disagree?
No, I don't disagree. I think they're going to have to be. And if for no other reason that organizations can't do zero trust overnight, right? And as we've alluded to before, there probably isn't even an end state. So along the way, there are going to be areas of vulnerability that, technologies like AI can exploit. So I think really around, the OT world, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can't really easily wrap an OT environment in a zero trust kind of capability easily, because those things don't have the ability to install software. So what we end up sort of doing is putting zero trust mechanisms at the edge, and that's highly effective, but certainly isn't the same level of zero trust protection that a user would get, for example. It doesn't have the same level of identity, for example, and sort of context. So I think there are always going to be areas where there is going to be the option to exploit. What we are going to have to do as practitioners is recognize the highest risks and the lowest investment to get the rewards that we seek.
I'll add on to that and say, I think we also need to ensure that we have the maximum possible visibility and the sharpest reaction times. Because for me, one of the core principles of zero trust is assume breach. And if we assume that AI can just day and night find ways to breach you, that risk level goes up. The only compensating control that I think makes a lot of sense is how fast can I react to when something happens? Not if, when. How fast can I react to that? And what can I do? And that might have been possible when you had something like cacti in your network monitoring everything. But now you've got people working from home, like we've talked about before, branch offices. I don't know if you've talked to customers using satellite technology with kind of leveraging zero trust over satellite or 5G. But I think our attack surface, while we're making it smaller, we're also increasing the number of inbound connections to a crazy extent that my brain certainly doesn't have the ability to categorize and process.
Right. And I think that's very much where we are, which is people are choosing to do their work on a multitude of devices. We've already talked about the number of IoT devices in our homes, for example, smart sort of systems, etc. So for security teams, the amount of data coming at them is just tremendous, right? It's like a tsunami of information. So really what we could do...
If you see a packet, generate an alert.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, we don't have an army of professionals, at our disposal. And AI can play a critical component in sifting out that sort of noise. But ultimately, you still need a human being to kind of take it to that next level and use your sort of skills wisely.
I think that for those SOC analysis and those event analysis, they tend to have a very short tenure at organizations because of the problem that you sorted out. So you mentioned the AI as a tool for the good guys, right? I know the fun marketing way is to talk about how the evil AI is coming to attack us, but as a tool for the good guys to really help provide that additional eyes on the 8 billion logs that are coming in a day.
Right. I mean, I get really excited about the newer tech inside of things. So, robots and the way we sort of control those elements of our, the next generation of our lives, whether they are autonomous vehicles or sort of drones delivering our sort of consumer goods that we sort of buy on the internet. And that's going to pose a whole new level of kind of challenge. When you can imagine the idea of, a drone flying over your head, carrying something heavy, and then it being exploited, well, those in the wrong hands can become, quite malicious. So I think aside from the actual threats themselves in terms of the exploits that the speed of AI can sort of give us, we've got to really think holistically about the type of threats that are out there and the real world sort of applications they can, expose to us.
So fundamentally, zero trust by default and not something where we're trying to build the ship in a bottle. Like it's much easier to build the ship and then build the bottle around it. And I think, in the last episode, we talked about it to some extent, where I think a lot of the challenges we have are we're trying to help people to retrofit networks and systems that have existed for 20, 30, 40 years. And that causes challenges. But if I'm understanding you correctly, like in this world of kind of 5G, devices, and I've got a couple of stories we can talk about if we have the time, but we need to have zero trust as like the default mechanism. So do you think that organizations, companies out there are ready for zero trust by default?
I think they're not ready yet, but certainly boards are paying attention. So they're gearing up to be ready. And in some areas, in some countries, they are certainly more mature in the zero trust space. There's certainly a lot of legislation happening in the US that is supporting a zero trust adoption. So normally we sort of find, with any technology, there are some early adopters, some bleeding edge kind of adopters, but there are others who will only adopt things when the legislation forces them to. So we haven't reached the point of legislation maturity. So therefore, not everybody is in the zero trust mindset. But as we kind of said before, zero trust is a philosophy. It's something that you do rather than you buy, and that's a cultural change. And cultural changes take far longer to bed in.
When I'm thinking about those cultural changes, I often think about, when we go and talk to people, they kind of want the easy answer, right? But it's like when you go to the doctor and you say, "Doctor, I'm not feeling good," they're not going to say, here's one zero trust pill for you to take. They're going to say, "Well, are you sleeping well? How are you eating? All of this. Oh, you smoke. Yeah, let's stop smoking. Let's stop that first." And that's sort of, to me, the analogy towards the inherent trust. Like we have this habit, and the faster we can get rid of that habit in just everything we do, the better and the more impactful, the more we're going to be able to innovate. And, you mentioned the legislation, which is something as a CISO, I get asked at least 6 to 7 times an hour about a lot of the, DORA and NIS2 and these kind of things. And what my concern is, I think they're both great pieces of legislation. They both explicitly call out zero trust. But it can't be something that becomes a checkbox exercise. So anybody who's listening to this and made it this far in our podcast series, let's remember that the aim of this is to increase security everywhere all the time, and not just to get an auditor to go away.
Right. So, we know that technology is not going to stop. It's forever sort of moving forward. Do you think the current frameworks, such as NIST and DORA, are equipped to handle, whatever technology comes next?
Yes, for what we have now, right? NIS2 and DORA, like we've talked about, both AI and 5G, they don't really explicitly call out, and they both have, very specific sets of threats that I see in terms of data loss. For example, there's a little thing I saw that's a little clip, and you can have it in a meeting, and it will use AI to generate notes and kind of highlights from your meetings, which for me, as the kind of guy that I am, I'm like, oh, that's awesome. I'd love to have all my meetings, all that recorded. But then I put on my CISO hat and I say, oh, look, that little puck is leaking all of my financial data, all of my HR conversations. And I think the legislation doesn't really address that. It's more, how do we achieve herd immunity as kind of an economic entity, which is a great step forward. I just want to make sure that we're focusing on the outcomes and not just on checking some check boxes.
Right. So that idea that enough of us do it, then we're all going to be sort of protected as part of that kind of larger way of working. Is that what you're...
I think that because of the information sharing, right? There's two ways to see this. One is the kind of cynical way, which is, I don't need to be faster than the bear. I just need to be faster than Marytn.
Right.
Right. The other one is, if we can get to X percentage of security as organizations, then that vector is not worthwhile to pursue. So those last lagging 5% or whatever will be safer because everybody else is safe. Right. That's sort of where I'm thinking. Although ideally, I want everybody to believe in zero trust as much as I do, in terms of a way to mitigate things and not just do it because the government said.
Right. So what do you think are the biggest, risks to the landscape for future technology? I think we've all heard in the news recently around, deep fakes, and certainly the UK government, as an example, is tackling that with legislation. Where do you think this is going to go next? What do you think people should prioritize in terms of, future proofing?
Okay, so with regards to kind of AI in general, you need to have an AI policy, and it should make sense. We released a report recently, and there's certain industries where you see more demand for use of AI, and certain industries where you see more blocking of AI. And I think that's really interesting, just as kind of a overview on how this technology could potentially impact. But yet you have to have a strategy around AI. Can we use it? If so, how can we use it? And how are we going to implement it internally? The second one, and I think this becomes, and I guess this is a CISO perspective, but with the advent of 5G and working from home or work from anywhere, you got to be willing to have your users, be working from, I'm in Sweden from my summer cabin, or maybe I'm working from Spain, or I decide to go to Florida and I'm working from the States. That's on me and within my contract. However, from a risk perspective, me moving to the US and working with EU data creates a bit of a problem and challenges in those compliance. And I think zero trust can also very much help with minimizing the amount of moving pieces you have to try to adhere to the spirit of those compliance elements. All right, so we've talked a little bit about kind of AI, and we've talked about 5G and IoT and all these kind of things. But if we're gonna sort of sum up what we've been talking about, what's the key takeaway from Marytn's perspective?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is recognizing that zero trust is this philosophy. The technology is going to change all the time. So embracing that idea of any user on any device anywhere is a really good way of thinking about it. And I think that's the one thing that zero trust has done, which is to commoditize those technology mediums and to flatten the variances of protection based on the device that you're on.
I'll add on that, that identity, that any user, that to me is the fundamental building block of how I advise all of the customers I work with to think, whether it's how do I provide access to applications? How do I provide access to elements of my cloud? How do I start doing incident investigations? Don't start with an IP address. I think earlier we said, the average person has 10 to 50 IP addresses.
Right. And they change all the time based on where you are at any given time.
It's so irrelevant. So identity and making sure that you do all the basic stuff. I feel like such a CISO when I say it, but two-factor authentication, limited authentication time periods, all that. But identity is the focus around all of this. Then when you go to the cloud or you go to Zero Trust, the flexibility inherent in Zero Trust, where we're not dependent on who you are necessarily as a person, but who your identity is, where you are, all of those different aspects that we need to make those decisions.
And I think we also recognize in that identity, it's not always identity of a person. It might be of a machine, it might be of a robot, it might be,
person, place, or thing, right?
Yeah, anything.
Of a noun.
Right. So I think it's an interesting way of looking at it, is that Zero Trust transcends the idea of a human being, but identity is still a critical component in that ability to make decisions.
And the flexibility that the Zero Trust model allows us to expand into different areas of business. We talked about drones and we talked about kind of 5G thingies, and do that in a secure way. So realistically, I did not think that I'd be able to leverage AI the way I am today a year ago. So who knows what the next year or 2 years are going to happen. We're still on the hockey stick and we don't know where in terms of development of these technologies. But I'm very confident that Zero Trust as a philosophy will allow us to minimize the maximum amount of risk while still allowing the rest of the business to leverage these new technologies and not be the guys who are like, yes, could you please fax me the purchase order? I'm waiting by. And then, no, Bob, get off the phone. I need the fax machine, right? Nobody wants to be that anymore.
Right. I think it's back to that art of saying yes and doing business safely, isn't it?
Yes. The instead of security being the office of no, you can't do that, we're the office of yes, go and go faster. That friction, removing that. So I that's what I think. I think we will see more Zero Trust as kind of the default mindset. We're not there yet. Maybe 50%. I'd like to say 60, but I think we're maybe 50% there in terms of global mindset around Zero Trust. But once we can do that and we can show the flexibility this provides and the defensibility against unknown attacks, unknown attack vectors, it'll be a simple choice for us to just build this in from the ground up. We've spent the past 3 episodes, and if you haven't listened to episode 1 or episode 2, please go back, listen to those. There's a lot of content. The first episode, we talked a lot about kind of the history of implicit trust and the problems that we had. Episode 2, we talked a lot about how Zero Trust is being implemented actively today and how COVID kind of was the push we all needed to make good security decisions. And in this episode, we've talked a little bit about how these new emerging technologies are going to potentially impact our adoption of Zero Trust. I want to thank Marytn for taking the time to sit with me here and record these episodes. I very much enjoyed our time together. And I want to thank you for listening. And I kind of have always wanted to say this, Marytn, so just excuse me. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching this. And if you have any feedback, please let us know. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.